Good morning. So it's Friday morning. I have today off, so I think I'm gonna go play some poker. 9:30 in the morning. I'm actually really tired. Went to bed around like 1, fell asleep on the couch, went up to the bed around like 2:40 a.m. But I did sleep in till 9 o'clock, so that's nice. So what's the plan for today? I'm gonna get some caffeine in my system, and then I'm gonna head out to Thunder Valley Casino, hit up their lunch buffet for some brunch, and then try to get on some poker tables. So Thunder Valley Casino is the biggest casino in the area. They hold WPT tournaments, they hold Heartland Poker Tour tournaments, and they have something like 36 tables. It's just some absurd amount of tables in the poker room, so it's really big. So yeah, so that's the plan for today. I'm gonna get going, try to get my body awake, get some caffeine in the system, and then head out to Thunder Valley Casino, where it's something like a 45-minute drive. So yeah, let's get today's vlog going. So I just let my dogs out to use the restroom in the backyard, and I noticed it was kind of foggy, so I went out front and I said, man, came out here, it's like, it's pretty foggy, so it's going to be an interesting drive out to Thunder Valley, but yeah, we'll see how it goes. Alright, so on a bit of a detour, called my dad. He wanted to go play with me at Thunder Valley, so drove over to my parents' house. It's kind of on the way there, so gonna pick my dad up and then continue on over to Thunder Valley to get a lunch buffet and play some poker. Ready to go play poker, Dad?
Yeah, I'm ready.
How long you guys are planning to play?
I'm ready.
You want to play poker too?
Huh?
Alright, so I'm back home from Thunder Valley Casino, and I'm happy to say that today's session was a success. Ended up winning some money. Bought in for 160 bucks, played only 1 hour, and cashed out for 220. And I always like to show $100 bills because I just go to the ATM. I usually don't go inside the bank. So I always have 20s. It's nice to get $100 bills. They just look cool to have, and they take up a lot less space in my wallet. So why did I only play for an hour? Well, when I went to pick up my dad, my mom decided she wanted to tag along as well because I told her we were going to the buffet for lunch. So she wanted to go, so I ended up taking both my parents and treated them to lunch, and then we proceeded over to the poker room. Now the cool thing about this is that I was always checking throughout the morning, and while I was eating, I was always on my phone checking Bravo Poker. So if you don't have Bravo Poker app, it's a pretty awesome app on your phone. I was checking to see what tables were running, and there's only one table of 3-6 limit, one table of 1-3 no limit, and one table of 4-8 PLO. So I was hoping some more tables would open up with 3-6 so we wouldn't have to wait. And literally, as we were walking into the poker room, they announced they're opening up a new table of 3-6, and everybody that was on the wait list or the call-in list, they told them that they were opening up the table. So we got over there quickly, and we got a seat in the game. So I bought in for 160 because I typically like to buy in for 50 big blinds in a limit game, and instead of buying in for 150, I just buy in for 160 because they give you dollar chips in $20 stacks. So it's just easier to give them 160. It's easier for the dealer, it's easier for me, and my chip stack looks cleaner too. So let's talk about the session. So how did the session go? Well, like I said, I won $60 in 1 hour. That's a pretty awesome win rate at limit poker. And my strategy in limit poker is hit and run. When I sit down at the table, if I take down a big win early in the session, I'll just get up and go. I did in Vegas playing 2-4. I ran up $100 an hour. Got up as the table was dying, and we were playing, I think, like 5 ways, and we were going to get blinded out. Told my buddy, it's like, hey, let's get out of here. Let's go do something else. He was up, I was up, and I left. And that's typically what I do nowadays for limit poker because I know that it's a bunch of slows, ups, and downs. And if you get a big up, then time to take the money and run and go do something else and have some fun. So now let's talk about the hands. All right, for the hands that I won, I decided to do a replayer, and I'm only going to do a replayer for one of the hands because this is the one where I want to talk about the details. And the other one is straightforward, and it's kind of more of an LOL type of hand, which I'll just talk about. So I initially just did this doing a talking head video, just talking into my camera, and I didn't like the way that it came out, so I decided to redo it. And so I'm using pokerhandreplays.com, and the dollar amounts are going to be a little bit off because it doesn't allow a $3 big blind, even though it is a $3 big blind. So the dollar amount's going to be off by a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. Okay, so another thing to notice too is that I didn't set the amount that the players have. I just left them at the default amount because it really doesn't matter. Nobody's getting all in limit anyways most of the time. So, I mean, don't worry about the amounts. In terms of what everybody had, I think I had like 140 to start the hand, and the other players in the hand had around anywhere between $50 and $80 to start the hand. So let's get into it. So let's go through the hand, and I'm just going to start playing through the hand. So you'll notice that there's going to be a lot of limping pre-flop, and this should be $3 instead of $2. So, just ignore that. And you'll notice that we have multiple limpers in the hand. It comes back to me with King 8 suited in the small blind. Typically, this hand's going to be a fold in no limit, but in limit, where my opponents are just horrifically bad, where everybody is limping or calling close to, I would say, anywhere between 40 and 80% of the hands, then I think our implied odds go up drastically, even in limit, because what I've noticed in limit is that people will go down and call down to the river with just top pair. They'll be super sticky with any sort of a draw. So I think if we flop a 2 pair, or if we end up making the nut flush or king high flush, then I think we're going to get paid off nicely. And given that we have really good pot odds, so instead of this being 2, so there's 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3, there's $16 in the pot, and there's 2 more for me to call, with the big blind actually being $3. So I'm getting really good pot odds to call anyways. And even though this is just a really crappy hand, in a table like this where the opponents are really bad and they're really sticky in their calling stations and they're just really bad recreational players that don't even have a clue what they're doing, it's a call. So I make the call, big blind checks, we go to the flop, and it's pretty dry flop. And for me, with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 opponents in the hand in a 6-way pot, it's not a good hand, right? I mean, I have middle pair with a really bad kicker, and loose passive fish typically like to play aces, regardless if it's a strong ace or a weak ace. So my plan on the flop is just to check fold, given that I really don't have that much equity. And what you'll notice is what happens is that it ends up checking all the way around and on the turn, we end up picking up some decent equity. Now, in terms of the 5 and the 3, so I don't remember exactly what these two cards were, except I know that they were really low. So so it may not exactly have been the 5 of diamonds and the 3 of clubs, but it was a low club and it was a low diamond. So it could have been like a 7 or a 4. Regardless, they're just really low cards. So given that it checked around on the flop, I now have middle pair with the nut flush draw. I decide to lead out for 6, which I think is fine. It's somewhat thin. Sometimes people are taking back a stronger king on the flop, but given that we do also have equity to make the club flush on the river, I think we can just lead out here anyways, and also try to take down the hand without going to showdown. So what's interesting is that this opponent ends up raising me on the turn. So what in the world do I think that he has? Well, he's been playing close to 100% of all the hands, so he's very loose. He has a VPIP of close to 100%. So I think he could sometimes slow play a decently strong ace. I think sometimes he ends up making 2 pairs, like maybe an ace-5 or an ace-3. Or sometimes he ends up slow playing a set or makes a set on the turn, or even has something like 5-3 that makes 2 pair. So I'm not ruling out any of those hands. So I think that he has, again, a pair of aces that he slow played, 2 pairs, and sets. I don't think he's making this raise with any sort of a draw. I think really he either has a made hand or he doesn't. And what's interesting is that this opponent decides to cold call the raise on the turn. So that's a bit suspicious, but for me, it improves my pot odds. So it comes back to me with middle pair, with nut flush draw, and getting with the exact amount. I did the math with the $3 big blinds. I had 8-1 pot odds, so I need to win 1/9 of the time, which is 11% of the time. So I need 11% equity to call here for my draw, and I have a lot more than 11% equity if I think that if I hit a king on the river, I think that wins a certain percentage of the time. If I think that an 8 wins a certain percentage of the time, and also I have the nut flush draw as well. So with the nut flush draw by itself, 9 outs times 2, that's 18% equity by itself. So even if I just only thought I had the flush draw, it's a call. And with potentially winning with trips sometimes and potentially winning with 2 pairs sometimes, I think it just makes the call so much easier. So I call, and the river is a low club. And so I end up making the nuts on the river. And the question is, do we lead out or do we go for a check raise? And seeing that how this is really a fairly big scare card, if I lead out on the river, I think it looks pretty obvious that I actually hit a flush. So I think the best way to go for value, especially when this opponent is actually showing a decent amount of strength on the turn, and seeing how he's a bad player and he's probably not thinking too much about what my range is or what my hand is. He's probably not even at that level of a poker player. He probably just knows that he has a strong hand and he's going to bet the river for value with either a set or 2 pair. So I decide to check. He leads out. This opponent calls, and we raise. And interesting enough, as expected, opponents being bad, sticky opponents, calling stations, they both call. And he mucks his hand. She turns up Queen 10 of clubs. And this was actually a lot more surprising to me than anything else. How in the world does she not raise on the river when he bets here, when I check? So let's actually, let's go back to the turn, and let's go back to the beginning of the river. So I check. He bets. She has the second nut flush, and she only calls. She only calls. Is that dumbfounding or what? I mean, I just don't get it. I mean, is she afraid to put in an extra $6 as a raise against him when it looks like I'm giving up on the river and I'm just going to be check folding? You have Queen 10 of clubs, and your opponent raised on the turn when the flush wasn't there, and he obviously has 2 pair or a set. Of course, he's probably not that good enough to think on that level, to actually put him on a really strong range, but she has to assume he doesn't have a flush because he raised when there wasn't a flush, but she has a second nutted hand, and he leads in again on the river, and she just calls. So it is dumbfounding, but I've done some thinking, and I've played a fair amount of limit, enough limit to know that people are weak passive, and they tend to fear the worst, and the money really doesn't seem to go in as a raise unless somebody has the nuts. Since I've been playing limit poker since the early 2000s, I've only seen an all-in on the river where there's raise and re-raise and kept going back and forth. Boat versus boat. One person had the top boat and the other person had the second top boat, where I think it was really difficult to put that person on the higher boat, because the way that it had, I think it was something like somebody had like king queen, the other person had pocket kings, and it was like a king queen queen. So the other person had to have the last combo of that pocket pair to have the higher boat. So they just kept re-raising and they put the money in, and I think it was either 3-6 or 4-8. But that's the only time I've seen the money go in limit. Most of the time, these passive opponents are just going to be calling, and sometimes I even see people call with the nuts. And I've seen people actually, the board was 3, 3, 3, 3. So there's quad threes on the board, and the river comes in ace. So there's an ace kicker on the board. This was 3-6 limit. This was just a couple weeks ago. And what happened was there's 4 people in the hand. 3 people check. The last person bets. The first person thinks for a very long time. They fold. Another person folds. The third person calls. And me and the guy next to me were just shaking our heads thinking, what in the world are they doing? It's a chop pot. And they were like, and the people that folded are like, well, I thought he could have had the ace. An ace in his hand. And the dealer explained, there's quads on the board and there's an ace kicker. The board plays. So the people are so bad in limit, they don't even actually know how to play the game. So I guess we can't expect them to play the game well. But I don't know. I just kind of expect somebody on the river, when they end up having the second nutted hand, to put in a raise here. So, it was a good play on my part, and having the nuts here, the raise, the check raise ended up working because I put him on a strong range anyways, but I would have suspected she would have raised to 12 so I could raise to 18. But she didn't, and I ended up taking down closer to a $90 pot because the blinds were $3 instead of $2. So I do need to add on, I guess, another $6. So it was closer to $90 instead of the 82. So that was the big hand that I took down for the session. And I only ended up playing 1 hour because my mom was there and she was ready to go. So I took down that big hand, and then a few hands later I ended up having, and was it actually the very next hand? I had to think about it. I was in small blind, and then I was actually on the button the very next hand. So the very next hand, and I'm just going to talk about the very next hand. So let me get this out of full size mode. The very next hand, this is actually a really funny hand. So the first card dealt to me was a queen, and I had my hand out next to my chips, and the dealer dealt the second card. It hit my hand, flipped over. It was a 7, I think, like the 7 of diamonds. So she just made it the burn card and the muck card. Threw in the muck, dealt me another card, which was a jack. Multiple limpers in the pot pre-flop, just like with this hand. And my dad was in the cutoff. He limps in, and I decide to limp in as well, so I overcall. So lots of people just limping in and calling. I overcall with the queen jack off on the button. And in regards to that, a lot of people that come from no limit are used to isolation raising. One thing that I would caution in limit is that with your weaker Broadway cards, with your weaker pocket pairs, if there's a lot of limpers in the pot, you don't want to raise it up. So for example, raising it from $3 to $6, because people aren't going to fold. They're all going to call. So you prefer to get in at a lower risk of a price and just try to see a flop with anything from like probably pocket 8s down to pocket deuces and your weaker Broadway cards, suited connectors and things like that. So the concept of isolation doesn't work in limit. Of course, we want to raise like aces, kings, and queens, and jacks and tens because we have a strong hand, and also probably even down to pocket 9s and like ace king, ace queen, ace jack. We want to raise those even with limpers. But weaker Broadway cards, weaker pocket pairs, we're just going to limp in and overcall. So anyways, so we end up going to the flop, and I guess I can just pull in Equilab. Let's actually pull in Equilab to discuss this hand. And it's really only between me and my dad. So I end up having, and I'll actually just do it because I don't remember. I'll use this instead. So I had queen jack offsuit, and that's queen jack offsuit. My dad in the cutoff had a Jack 10 offsuit, and everybody else, I don't know what they had. So the flop comes Jack Jack 4. And so we both end up flopping trips. Of course, I have him out kicked. And this is the funny thing because I got dealt the Jack after she dealt me the 7. So I think it's quite funny. It checks all the way around to me, and my dad checks his trip jacks, I guess, to slow play. I lead out, it's limit. There's a lot of people in the hand. I think anybody that has a pocket pair between 4s and jacks are definitely going to call. Anybody that has a 4 is probably going to call as well. So I lead out for 3. Everybody folds. My dad calls. The turn is a queen, and I don't know which suit it was, so we'll just put this one on there. And so, of course, I make the boat, jacks full of queens. On the turn, my dad decides to lead into me. Anybody else I would raise, but it's my dad, so I just call. The river is a consequential, probably I think it was like something like a 7. And so it doesn't really change anything at all. He checks, I bet he calls, and I take it down. So, I thought about raising the turn, but it's my dad, and I didn't really feel like bloating up the pot and taking more money from him just because it's my dad. Anybody else I would have raised, and after the hand, I told my dad, I was like, hey, Dad, I didn't raise you because it was you, and everybody else was laughing, and the lady in the last hand that had the second nut flush, she was like, well, you raised me. I was like, yeah, you're not my dad. So those were the only 2 hands that I won, and after that hand, my mom was just sitting waiting for us. I saw her right in the edge of the card room, so I went over there and asked her if she's ready to go, and she said yeah. So we ended up just packing up and going. My dad lost like $24, nothing big. I ended up winning $60, and it was a good session, and that's my strategy with limit anyways, is a hit and run strategy, because if you think about limit in general, it's a bunch of just kind of like mild ups and downs. And if you're anywhere within a session where you just go on a big upswing, it's better just to take that money and run, just because it's not that often that's going to happen. Lots of times if you stay, you're just going to start kind of dwindling down your stack anyways. So I typically do a hit and run, and lots of times when I go to the card rooms, if I end up winning like 3-6, I end up with like $45 or $60 really quick, I'll just get up and leave. It's worked for me, and I typically have a lot of winning sessions, not that many losing sessions. In fact, out of probably, I would say, the last 7 or 8 times that I played limit, I've only had 1 losing session and 1 break-even session. But yeah, that's limit. I like my hit and run strategy. I think it's a pretty solid strategy, because I've had other sessions where I built up a bit of a stack and then kind of just got dwindled down over time because I stayed on the table. But yeah, it was a pretty basic session, straightforward. Always nice to come home with a positive win in limit, because those of you that played limit before, you know what I'm talking about, how you can just get blinded out and your money can just start dwindling away, especially because of the effect of the rake. If they do drop for a jackpot as well, you know how that feels. So, if it's 1-3 and they're dropping 3 before you even see the flop, there end up a lot of money just goes to the house. So anyways, I hope that you liked in this vlog, and I hope you liked this replay where I did the replay with this. Let me know if you liked it where I did it into this replayer. It's not always going to be 100% accurate because, like I said, I can't put a $3 big blind. So even if I'm playing 1-3 no limit, I can't put it in here. I'd have to put 1-2. But I think it's close enough, and I think that it's fairly accurate in the way that I depicted it. So anyways, yeah, thanks for watching. If you liked today's vlog, please click the thumbs up, the like button down in the bottom corner of the screen. If you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel, definitely subscribe. And if you haven't been over to MicroGrinder Poker School, microgrinder.com, please check us out for all of our free and low-cost training resources for you fellow poker players. So appreciate you taking the time out of your day watching, and I will see you at the next episode of our Nightly Grind Poker Vlog.